Hello, everybody. My name is Dynasty. I am one half of La Maison de Rouge. Welcome to our weekly Monday night live broadcast where we interview all kinds of interesting people in the kink world. And it's so wonderful to have all of you guys here joining us. And so today we have Miss Anya Avalon. And here she is. Welcome.
Hi, Dia.
Hi, Anya. So great to have you. So for those of you who are just now joining us, we have Anya today. Anya Avalon is a BDSM guide and dominatrix based in Seattle and San Francisco. She has held ritual space for healing and shadow work in dungeons and nature since 2012. Anya's work in art, psychology, and magic inform the content of her kink exploration and trajectory toward blended practice. I'm so pleased to have you on today, Anya, and I've been wanting to interview you for quite a while, so this is such a treat. Thank you for joining us. So let's, aside from your pronouns, are there any other self-proclaimed titles that you hold?
Oh my goodness, what a stressful question. There are no other self-proclaimed titles that I hold. Mistress and goddess and what have you are all fantastic, and truthfully, none of them strike me as the one. So Anya is fine for followers and clients and anyone else.
Awesome. All right. So we've got some interesting comments already, but we're just going to let all our viewers and audience and polite, respectful fans know that we are here to answer questions after the interview. We are having a little bit of difficulty with the sound, and we've tried troubleshooting it in many ways. So we're going to just do our best to enunciate clearly. And it seems like some of our audience members are also to let know that the sound is a little funny. So just, try to put yourself in a very quiet place and tune in with your inner ear. Maybe your third ear. So the mic is about as close as it can be, and it would be really nice if everybody could just be as respectful and patient as possible during this interview, because that's what, that's all that we can do. We could try one more thing. Let's see. Let's see what happens if we go sans headphones.
All right, friends, hold on just one moment.
How's that?
Oh, that is so much better.
Fantastic. I was a little bit worried about feedback because I'm now hearing you, and you might also, and you, the listeners, may also be hearing Dia double time, but hopefully this is a little bit better for all of us.
Okay. I can hear myself. But it doesn't sound like, loud or annoying or, maybe we can, let's see if our audio, okay, very good, much better. All right, so that seems to be what's going to work.
You have a beautiful voice. Everyone gets twice of it. Double servings.
Well, thank you. I feel funny about that, but thank you. All right, so let's start from the beginning. As a kinky person, when did you first realize that you were kinky, or what was your first kind of kink related experience?
So, Dia, I have listened to so many of your LMDR podcasts, and they are fantastic, and everyone has such a wonderful kink origin story. And I was left thinking of mine and feeling that mine was a little bit pedestrian, to be honest. I explored kink a little bit as a teen, and somewhere along the way, after some really tame community explorations, learned what a dominatrix was, and exactly how I learned what a dominatrix was still sort of eludes me. Maybe in porn, maybe I met someone, but truthfully, it wasn't that remarkable of an experience, obviously, because I can't totally say how I learned. But when I learned, I knew this is absolutely it, and this is the path I'm on. Gotta do it, gotta find a way to do it. And I was an undergrad in LA at the time, and I reached out to a few people, no names that even remain with me, and just really never got a response saying, hey, can I apprentice with you? And I figured, well, that's it. There's no possible way into professional dominatrixing. I've tried everything. So continued to explore a little bit more in my personal life. And while I was naturally on the toppier side, it wouldn't be fair to say that there was like any moment, any like, aha, this is it for me. Mm-hmm. So lots of little things. I'm always amazed when people have stories from like middle school or elementary school about how they yanked someone's braid and knew that was it. But mine was just a little bit of dabbling and exploring and sort of kind of gradually learning about pro BDSM in my late teens and early 20s. And the majority of my learning about kink and the majority of my learning about BDSM has been within the context of being a professional.
Okay. I mean, I think that that's like perfectly relatable too, because it's like you're doing it more in a like conscious and exploratory way. You know, you weren't just like dropped into it, and you had an idea and you kind of like followed the trail, you know, and I think that that's actually very commendable, because a lot of times, you know, we grow up kind of sheltered, and then we're like, whoa, you know, we go nuts. And you know, it's like, it just depends on like kind of your environment and what, you know, like what you're tuned into. So I think that that's actually pretty relatable.
It's a pretty it's a pretty sort of like every dominatrix, like every woman, every Joe Blow story path to BDSM. A little bit of exploring, something felt intuitively correct, and I tried to follow the path a few times, and one of the times it hit, I made my way through a door at a dungeon and then learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, did you learn a lot from the dungeon as far as like positive and negative, and kind of like that's where you were groomed and like, you know, if that was your first experience learning, right?
I mean, it was my first experience learning. I did a little bit of exploring in community scenes, learned about safe, sane, consensual kink, risk-aware, consensual kink, and theoretically had some ideas about what I was going into, but hands-on, anything beyond just a little bit of play, yeah, that was my first experience for sure. And I learned a lot, and I didn't necessarily learn what I expected to learn, but being groomed at a dungeon is such a strange, mixed, wild ride.
Mm-hmm.
You were from dungeon too, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that it went beyond what I expected to learn as well. Just kind of like any, you know, life-changing, transformative experience, like going to university. And I think that it's always interesting to hear, you know, about everybody's experience at dungeons, because it's there's the good and the bad, which helps shape us. So can you talk a little bit more about what you learned and what wasn't expected?
That's a fantastic question. I had some hands-on learning and sat with a lot of women who had been working at the dungeon for between 5 and maybe 10 years at that point, at the upper end, and got to witness them and hear and learn from them how they conceptualized what they were doing. So seeing what they were doing was helpful for orienting me toward what I could expect and what I might like to try with visitors of my own someday, but really hearing about their process and understanding their like self as dominatrix conceptualization was more than half, I think, of the learning for me. How people thought about what they were doing, whether it was healing work or spiritual work, or whether it was work against patriarchy, or there was something like highly technically specific that they were really interested in. Really getting a breadth of understanding was I think unexpected. I expected, I suppose, to learn how to maybe whip a man or tie some fantastic rope bondage. And I did learn both of those things, but what a dominatrix is, I think, was more of the learning than I had anticipated at that time.
Yeah, I love that, is because you start to really understand that each person that works as a pro-dom really sees themselves differently, or how they see themselves, and what kind of trajectory they want to project forward with their own career, instead of just kind of like fitting the mold of that archetype, which is something that like took me a really long time to understand. And I think that for me, I performed dominatrix for a very long time, just because that was a comfort level that, you know, like as a performer, that I was able to keep up.
Sure.
And it took me like time away from the dungeon to really craft my own persona also.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think, you know, you and I have some similarities in how we are moving forward with our own craft. And I really love talking about this kind of stuff. And I don't want to like, you know, totally consume the whole interview with this kind of talk. So
I'm so curious.
So there's definitely, okay, let's back up just a tiny bit and move into kind of the evolution of your own sexuality within all of this.
Yeah, indeed. I've been, well, I was going to start with I've been a polyamorous person for my entire adult life, but then I thought, I'm also a psychological clinician, and my instinct was to say, well, why is that my first answer? I think it's my first answer because so much of that is coming up for question for me right now. So moving backwards, I have been a polyamorous person for my entire adult life. All of my adult relationships have been within the context of polyamory, and having an openness and a willingness to consider alternative relationship forms and consider the dynamics that are at hand with sort of newer eyes. Each time I might be attracted to someone, or perhaps there's some portion or whole of a relationship to pursue in some context, was really useful learning for me, not only in developing who I was sexually and who I would become sexually as an adult, but also in kink. But nonetheless, I think so that's where I started. That's where I am now. What else has evolved in my sexuality? I suppose I've fine-tuned a lot of kink interests over the years, right? Because I came into this thinking I am generally totally fascinated with this aesthetic. There's something sort of tonally that's really pulling at me here, and I don't know what it is, but I have to explore it. And I think similar to you, I was taught to perform being a dominatrix at the beginning of my career, and took that to heart, and then sort of laid that on top of my personal sexuality and thought, well, maybe this is for me. And over the time, I think I'm getting really out in the woods. So if I am, just please stop me and we'll start.
You're good.
So over time, I guess I just sort of tried to lay several ideas and iterations of like what my sexuality might be, that I've learned professionally over the content of my personal life. And I guess that's pretty exploratory. There's this sense that things might kind of be evolving over time, that I'm integrating things that I am focusing my attention on into my own bedroom. And some things have fit and some things haven't. And I suppose where I am right now is that a lot of my personal interests reflect a lot of my professional interests, and they kind of weave in and out. And I guess all that to say, it feels like I'm in flux. I'm polyamorous, I'm kinky. I think I'm in flux, and I think that based on my answer in this moment, I may be in a place to revise.
That's always nice. Yeah, when the like, I like to kind of talk about things in visual metaphors. So it's almost like the double helix of a DNA, and when it like crosses back over toward each other, which I love about the evolution of our sexualities and our kinks, is that it's not linear. It's almost like a spiral, where we come back through some of the things that we've been through, but we ourselves are different. You know, it may be like the same activity or the same kink, but we're at a different place with it.
It's a beautiful visual.
Awesome. So let's well, I think that, you know, it's really great that your sexuality and your kinks are kind of like in parallel motion with each other, through the evolution, through your like experimentations and in your growth. At what time did you involve ritual and kind of like maybe your spiritual beliefs into it?
Yeah. I think this might be the crux of your earlier comment. This might be the thread in. I think I did it really early without recognizing that I was doing it. I noticed that I was ritualizing lighting candles, lighting incense, meditating before sessions, when I didn't necessarily see all of my colleagues doing that in the dungeon where I was working. And I assumed that was just a thing that I do before I meet someone else, before I have a first interaction and an interview, an engagement. These are just things that I do to prepare myself. And then that ritual space, the space of ritual opening before sessions, just kind of got bigger and bigger and began to bleed into the sessions themselves. And that came pretty early. And I think it was probably when maybe a couple years before I left the dungeon, that I was able to recognize that what I was doing was actually holding ritual space for submissives. People came to visit me. And that was an interesting moment of reconceptualization for me. And actually, as we're talking about this, I'm in the process of reconfiguring the way that I talk about it with people who might be interested in visiting me, because I'm finding that the way that I used to speak about it no longer quite fits as well as it once did. So I'm glad to have this conversation with you today as a means of maybe exploring that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm in the same place. And also just like, I think that there's definitely a draw to the kind of language that we use. And, you know, I call it spell casting, because like when you're using words, you're literally spelling and casting spells. And a lot of times, you know, the kind of words that we use draw the kind of people that are, you know, looking for certain experiences. And if they're too out there, then a lot of people won't understand. And so sometimes, you know, like you have to kind of like throw in a few words that are neutralizing or that are a little more sexy or whatever. And then, you know, like it's all over the place. It's just whatever you want to align with.
Right.
So yeah, I'm definitely in the same place as you. But I'm also finding that what really interests me and makes me feel fulfilled is actually more on the spiritual side of BDSM, and the rituals and the overarching spiritual journey that that BDSM could be a part of,
Sure.
but not the whole of, I think is also profound in a lot of ways. So it's something that
These are my ditto fingers.
So I'm finding that, you know, like it's also important to, of course, talk about pleasure and pleasure positivity and how pleasure plays into transformation and healing as well, because it's not just about like the woo woo, you know, it's about feeling things in your body that, you know, for some people, normal conventional sex doesn't really do it for them, and so there needs to be kind of like a little bit more to it. And then like I don't know, I think it's really fascinating to hear different people's takes on these intersections too.
I've noticed that LMDR has been putting out calls for people to talk about the ways in which BDSM has been a component of their trauma work. And I'm very interested in learning more about that, either in private or on the air or in some other way. And that brings up this other curiosity that I have, which is when I came into this work about 8 years ago, there was none of this around me, or perhaps there was, and I just didn't have the eyes for it. I wasn't aware that it was there. And listening to your recent interview with Simone Justice, I became aware of, you know, how many cycles there are through like the broader tones of BDSM. What BDSM is at this time is different than what it is 7 years from that time, is different than what it is 16 years from that time. And we're sort of operating through broader cycles. And I'm having a hard time understanding if this has always been the case, if there has always been this component of spirituality and healing and somatic work in what we're doing, if things are being talked about in a different way now, or if there is something that is coalescing that is actually sort of intrinsically different than things in the past. And maybe you have I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you know the answer to that?
I think that it's not or, it's and. So maybe all of those things are happening.
Yep.
I think that there has been a lot more like research and development in the areas of psychology that cover trauma. And with the book that recently came out called The Body Keeps the Score, we're starting to understand trauma on different levels, and in different depths and capacities. And so being trauma informed, I think, has also a new language around it. So I think like in the past, a lot of people have pathologized BDSM, and also people in the past didn't necessarily talk about BDSM in such spiritual terms, because that's also kind of like a resurgent interest, you know, like
Really?
Like people talking about spirituality in a lot of different ways, rather than just like kind of the hippy dippy way or the new age way. And also, you know, people who are getting into BDSM are not just they're holding a lot of other titles and positions and levels of education too, like Simone Justice, like Damiana Chi, like so many people that I've come to learn about. You know, there's just a broader breadth understanding of the intricacies of BDSM, and so it involves so many more intersections now, and so it can go deeper into the psychology that we're starting to learn vocabulary about, and the spirituality that we're starting to see, reemerge, and also the intersections of feminism and political activism, and the way sex work is kind of like the sex workers are like the canary in the coal mine. And there's just, everything is like more broad spectrum now. I
knew you'd have the perfect answer to my question. I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's a coalescing of all of these things that's coming together in a way that perhaps looks quite different than it has when they were a little bit further apart, when they were more disparate in the past. I'm so excited to be a dominatrix in this time. I'm so excited to be surrounded by people who are curious about these things that I'm so curious about.
Yeah, and it's also something that is not as kept underground and secret and private anymore. Sure. Especially with all of the popular media shows. Mm-hmm. Kind of like dabbling in BDSM and kink, and all the representation and all of the true representation that's also surfacing a lot more too. Because knowing that some of our colleagues are actual consultants for some of the kink scenes, and
actually,
yeah. So I feel like granted, it's not as. You could always make it as private as you want, but it's starting to gain a lot more understanding, which is great in my opinion.
I think so too. I think this, obviously this is something that draws me to BDSM, this the somatic components, the healing components, the trauma work, the shadow work, the depth psychology, all of this sort of coalesces, the word of the day, comes together in this nice little locus of interest for me. And I'm glad for the media around it. I'm glad for these things being a little bit louder. I'm glad for the people around me who share these interests. I'm just so excited. I'm glad to talk with you about this today.
Me too. Yeah, and also bringing in this component of spirituality, I think, is also really important and of the time, because in my opinion, our culture lacks spiritual health, and our culture is in a lot of ways spiritually ill. Like there's a lot of attention being paid to sex, to pleasure, to money, to healing, but all of that is actually spiritual as well. And spirituality is kind of what brings it all together into a wholeness and a oneness. So it's like we're at such a fascinating and privileged time to be able to engage with it on so many different levels too.
I've thought about that in terms of our culture lacking integration, sort of, a macro trauma disintegrates the pieces, our internal pieces, right? Cuts off pieces of ourselves from other pieces of ourselves until our parts are no longer talking. And it seems like in a bigger picture that might be going on with humans in the natural world, humans and other humans. There's just massive disintegration. And it's so, I'm returning to you bringing in the Bessel van der Kolk book that you just mentioned, The Body Keeps the Score, which is fantastic. And I hadn't considered that as a pivot point for BDSM. So we'll have some things to think about after we talk. I'm still, reading it, and I think that still digesting it, but it's bringing so much understanding to what I see a lot of times in that disintegration on a micro level as well as on a macro level. And BDSM is something that can bring a lot of people together. It creates community, it creates connections of relationships. There's always
when even as a professional, you cultivate relationships with your clients,
Right.
that can turn into, you know, like something beyond just a client provider relationship. And there is so much potential for like the expansion of what BDSM can bring. And so I think, that book is definitely like one of the you know, turning points for me in like, oh my gosh, so many possibilities, as well as, so I wanted to just kind of throw in there this idea of the femdom farm that I've been talking about a lot lately. And
I'm dying. I'm literally dying. This is so exciting.
it is so exciting. It's the idea of balance for me. So I, as a pervert, need like an environment of wholesomeness to thrive.
Yeah.
And if I'm like deeply immersed in the kink world and in like sex work and BDSM, it's hard for me to feel like I'm perverting anything until I go full circle back into wholesomeness.
Sure.
So that's, you know, I need that contrast. And the femdom farm provides that contrast, as well as like a holistic environment of so many things that I feel like the future needs, which is so this concept of ecofeminism that I recently learned about, where it's a return to nature, a return to community, excuse me, and humanity, and like cycles, and acknowledging and honoring kind of like the cycle that you are a part of and that I'm a part of, which is, you know, like everything starts from a seed, and grows into a plant or a fruit or a flower, which produces seeds, and then that gets planted. So we're a part of that cycle as well. And for us to like, for patriarchy and capitalism to cut it off in a way where everything is so isolated and so hierarchical, it's not healthy. So it's, you know, it's like returning to those cycles of the moon, of nature, of even the way that like that women have, you know, their moon cycles, and that's like, it's almost like a way to tell time. And bringing in paganism and kind of like honoring all the spirits of everything that's alive, even if you're killing it, because that's a part of the cycle too, is death. That's one of the things about the femdom farm that's kind of like the grander vision. More specifically, you know, I was fantasizing about the shack.
Really the opus for an alpha witch. This is a masterpiece.
I cannot wait until everybody can come and do their thing on the farm, you know, because everybody has a thing. And whether it's service or planting things, or, you know, like some kind of anything, and like anything is allowed on the farm, as well as family, you know, like let's bring our families there and learn about things in a wholesome way, and then when the kids go to sleep, we can have our fun.
This is really lovely, Dia. I'm impressed, and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. It's not something that, you know, I haven't fully, like the vision isn't, it's still growing, and haven't signed any contracts yet, but it's, you know, it's brewing, it's growing, the seeds have been planted, and there are seedlings. But let's talk more about you. Are there any insights to the evolution of your work experience that you would like to share? Like insights about yourself, insights about the world?
Insights about myself or insights about the world? Well, one of the things that I can credit to working as a BDSM professional is becoming more in touch with my intuition, talking about cycles and connection. You know, a lot of female-bodied people and people of all sorts of female identity are kind of gaslit around their intuition from childhood on, told to distrust ourselves and defer to other people for guidance and paths forward. And I was among them for sure. And in, you know, a process of my own outside of BDSM work, but very largely as a function of BDSM work, I sort of came back into connection with that. And I suppose I would say that I don't think I'm the only person who's had that experience of returning to connection with intuition through BDSM exploration or being a dominatrix. And that's really something to nurture and something to cherish. So that's perhaps the strongest thing that comes forward when I think of what I've learned about myself or what I've learned about other people. I've seen that happen with others, and it's interesting when I notice that there are distortions, sort of experiences non-professionally which distort my intuition. They'll sort of show up in my work. I'll think, oh, why did I do that? That was a very strange judgment call I made. Do you have this experience too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's actually really important. And I would love to hear, you know, any of our audience members also, you know, relate or not about kind of finding your own voice, your own inner voice, and really listening to that through the experiences of like kind of your own BDSM evolution. I totally relate to everything that you just said about the you know, being gaslit. I also think that that's kind of like of the time, you know, like as we grow through, as we move through time in this day and age, we are becoming more and more attuned to the idea of individuality and listening to ourselves and being centered or grounded, you know. Right. So these words are also like trending in a lot of ways, and I think that these ideas of connecting to our inner voice, our intuition, our gut feelings are becoming stronger because there is so much in that illusion of like, oh, you need whiter teeth, or you know, you're not skinny enough, or you know, like whatever, you need this thing, you need that thing, you're not, like, be afraid of this, you're probably sick in this way. This is like, all of these things are meant to sell us something. And we're becoming so much more attuned to this idea that we don't need to buy stuff to be perfect. We are actually already really good to go as we are.
So maybe to think of how recent the advent of marketing is. It's what, 70 years old, really? It's so very new, and to think of how much damaging as a class of employment marketing has done to women specifically in such a very short period of time, and to our intuition, such that it should be this intergenerationally communicated experience of gaslighting is wild.
Yeah.
7 years, it's not that long.
No, it's not. And also there's, I think that that's definitely connected to the industrialization of our food, of transportation, of so many other things, and the way that, I guess, like late capitalism has like kind of become this, like mutated into this thing that has raped all of the land's resources, and all of that's connected, like the, you know, the female bodied experience of being gaslit on a micro level, and then like everything else in the world on a macro level.
Some would even say the female body being gaslit as the first, or was the first experience. I think that's an argument that many people would make. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, Eve, right? And Lilith.
Sure.
Yes. So it's I don't know, it's great to talk about these things like theoretically and philosophically, but let's talk a little bit more about kind of the practical applications of what you are doing with your career and your craft, and some of the things that you've seen, kind of like some of the ways that you've affected your clientele.
Absolutely. So I think that if you were to sit in a session room with me, you would see me talking a lot. There's a lot of, I don't talk a lot with clients who come to see me for BDSM sessions. We do an awful lot of talking. It's really important for me to develop a rapport with someone before I even begin to think about laying any sort of hand on them. And following that, there are a few ways that I like to get inside. I like breath work. I like trance work. I like electrical play. Anything that sort of deals with the ether, I suppose. Deals with the air around us, deals with the space between our skin and what's happening in that moment of transmission is really where the poetics of BDSM live for me. That's kind of where it's at. So if there's a way that I can have you engaging in some Wim Hof breath work while I'm electrocuting you by touching you, and also by effect electrocuting myself as well, and just not squealing while I do it. That's probably where things land for me. I think there's a moment of how to say, it's about taking you there and back. Really, that's true, I think, for most BDSM practitioners, whether they're working in a spiritual context or working in something that's a little bit more bread and butter, directly clear cut sexual context, or perhaps it's discipline, sadism, and masochism as they showed up in the 60s. It's still that building to catharsis and that release, and then finding what you learned, how you changed, what developed, what shifted in that moment of catharsis, and bringing it back to the other side. So there's the retrieval of something, and what that something is kind of different for everyone. It's different for each person who sits with me. It's different for each person every time, whether it's just a breath of calm that they needed in an ordinarily really, or an otherwise really stressful day, or maybe it's a look at what they're missing in their lives. That can be quite painful, but it's something that you come back with quite often in BDSM rooms, I imagine. Yeah, I'm trying to think of where you started with this question.
Well, I think you answered it, because you're joining this person on their own journey, and you're kind of like guiding them to their own like pearl, let's say, because it's different for everyone, right? And so each person, they may be looking to get somewhere, and then how do they get there is where you come in, right. and then bringing them back. You can't just leave them there. Oh, no. Which is why aftercare is so important. Yeah, so it's, I think that being able to meet somebody where they are in terms of where they're starting out and where they would like to go sounds like you have this understanding of like whether it's like sexually, or the working through pain, or like a spiritual experience, being able to join them, which is in like some ways of like hypno speak, like joining and pacing with them.
I'm so curious. I'm a newcomer to hypnosis in both BDSM and clinical settings. I know a little bit, but not very much. And what I do know, I'm happy to share with people, and I love doing that. But I don't really know hypno speak. Is that what it's called? Joining and pacing?
Joining and pacing is actually hypno speak. Yeah. Okay. And it's happening, like mentally. So you're speaking, and you're inducing somebody. So it sounds like this is what you're already doing, because you do a lot of talking already.
I do, right?
Yeah. So, and that's basically what hypnosis is like a more like subconscious way of having a conversation. Sure. And so when you join them with joining them where they're at in their head, and then kind of like setting the pace of where to go next, guiding them through that experience.
Yeah. Seems like I should learn more hypnospeak. This seems like a good way to this is a good way to conceptualize what I'm doing, for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like you're kind of already there. When I learned hypnosis, I was kind of surprised at how, it's simple, but it's also nuanced because everybody's different, right? And so you don't want to like necessarily paint a picture for somebody else. You want to join them in the picture that you guys are kind of painting together.
Sure. That's been my experience. I've dabbled in hypnosis with some of my more regular clients, and I love it. It's a fantastic exploration, and it's ripe for exploration. There's more to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Let's ask a couple more like kind of light and fun questions, and then we'll get to these questions that we've got coming in because it sounds like, we've got some interesting questions that might be a little more in depth. So I have 2.5 questions for you.
Okay.
What are your vices and virtues?
Ooh, what are my vices and virtues? That's a good question. I think a vice is that sloth, maybe. I take a very long time to make decisions. Like I move at a snail's pace toward almost everything, and I'm not sure that I need to. I think that probably shows up in my sessions as well. I'm really slow going. But then on the other hand, maybe it's a virtue. Maybe there's something gained in moving very slowly. But I'm not going to it's a cop-out answer. I'm not going to cop out and say that's both my vice and my virtue.
No. I mean, I think that like, it's funny. I relate to you on so many different things. And that's one of the things that I also consider a vice and a virtue is that I take my time. And sometimes I probably take too much time. But I take my time because I need to connect to that inner voice. And sometimes I'm like so sensitive to everything else around me that I really have to cushion myself, from all the other stuff outside.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. It's those hour and a half long coffee mornings where most of the good stuff comes in, where most of the good stuff fights its way through the fuzz.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fuzz, and sometimes it's all in here, Most of the time, it's all in there.
Yeah, most of the time, definitely. So I'm slow. I think that's probably the complaint that most close around me would leverage against me, and it's definitely one I would leverage against myself too.
Feel you on that, and that's totally fine if that's both your vice and your virtue, because I think that taking your time with something, being virtuous, is kind of like an act of rebellion against capitalism, which demands that we're right there all the time, answering all the questions immediately.
No, I'm against time on every level for sure. It's and to phrase it a different way, I guess, careful and attentive. I'm slow, but I'm also careful and attentive.
Yes. Yeah. All right, that's totally awesome to
the good questions.
Just to hear somebody else say that actually makes me feel a little better about myself. Okay, and then your sun, moon, and rising signs.
Ooh, can I ask yours after this as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, my sun is Scorpio, my moon is Aquarius, and my ascendant is Capricorn. What about you?
Okay, wait, your sun is Scorpio.
Huh.
Okay, that makes sense. Your moon is Aquarius.
Correct.
Okay, and then your rising is Capricorn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I see that.
You see that?
Well, I mean, I have a better picture of you because I've never actually met you in person. Okay, so my sun is in Sagittarius. My moon is in Leo. And then my rising sign is Aquarius.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I know the least about Sagittarius among the three. Sagittarius would be the hardest for me to characterize.
I feel like I'm still kind of growing into my Sagittarian self. But the qualities are, we are straight shooters. We don't like spend too much time deliberating. We're the centaur with the bow and arrow, which is
nice.
Such a multitasking kind of sign. And a lot of times, because of this quality, we put our foot in our mouth and we say things that are kind of harsh or curt, and what we deem as truthful. And as a fire sign, like we tend to be pretty upbeat and active, fearless even sometimes.
Lovely. I can totally see that.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So here is now the time for you guys to ask your questions, and we do have quite a few questions. So I'm going to go ahead and put them up. So we were talking about how BDSM is kind of like become a lot more visible and represented in the media. And John Scott asked, but does it lose the taboo element?
Does it, are you asking, John, if increased representation means that the taboo falls away a little bit? I think that's what John might be asking. Is that what you think, Dia?
I think so. That's when this question came up. So, yeah. I
don't know. Maybe, perhaps. And I guess the question then becomes, what's the value of taboo? Is there interest in things remaining taboo? Is there something about going against that's fundamentally important to the content we're talking about? And maybe there is, but I think that if taboos brush off the top as things are more broadly represented, they probably develop down at the bottom a little bit more too. So it seems like a musical chair taboo situation. I don't think you
yes.
Taboo.
Yes. That's kind of how I see taboo too. And I think that there's always going to be things that are taboo, even if we, are shedding light on more and more things. Like you said, there's always going to be like the one chair that nobody sits in, or that the one person that doesn't get a chair. So it doesn't necessarily lose the taboo element altogether. I mean, and I think that, again, like some things about fetishes and kinks are always going to be taboo because they are morally reprehensible. And that's okay to play with in the context of like consenting role play. But it's also something that, that should get talked about in a realistic way of like why it's taboo and why it's like actually wrong.
So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It also occurs to me that new taboos have developed in the past 100 years. Things that weren't taboo 100 years ago have taken on and twisted into a totally different social meaning than they had before. And you can always find ways to pervert things. I think we're not running out of material here.
No, definitely not. But just to kind of reiterate my point, let's say, for example, like pedophilia is always going to be taboo. It is never okay. But age play within BDSM is something that people engage with in a way that, like all parties are consenting and of age to consent. And so if you have, a dom or a fetish player or an escort who is willing to pretend like they are young, or even a minor, and they are of age to consent to pretend, then you can role play this and it's okay. And it's still taboo.
I appreciate you bringing that back around. Absolutely. I'm surprised, in fact, by some of the conversation around this that I encounter online sometimes. I'm surprised around misattribution, perhaps, around misidentification between damaging social situations and consenting BDSM roleplay, which is obviously another can of worms that perhaps there's more time for during a different conversation, or you'll talk more about with your next guest.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that for some people, they tend to conflate BDSM with abuse.
True.
And so they themselves maybe don't really understand how BDSM works. And that there is a lot of negotiation and a lot of, conversation around these scenes. And what they only see, or what they're seeing in pornography, is not everything that there is, and it's not necessarily even real. It's more like a fantasy representation.
Absolutely.
So so that's another important distinction, is that most of the time pornography is fantasy. Okay, let's see. We've got Ray 1962, and it's not off subject, but she says, and this is a two-part question. I believe that, we were talking about BDSM in general, and this has been their interest for years. Now at 57, they're seeking and failing, much online, and much to learn how to trust.
Much online and much to learn how to trust. So it sounds, Ray 1962, like you might be entering the world of BDSM online right now for the first time. And how to trust, what a good question. Developing rapport and developing relationships are the foundation of trust in BDSM. And doing that online remains a bit of a mystery to me, to be totally forthright. I'm not someone who provides many online sessions, or I don't personally participate in many. You don't want online. Okay. You do not want online. You would like a
real, but I believe that Ray is seeking online is where they're coming from. And Ray, I'm using they as your pronoun because I don't know if you identify as a she, her, or what your pronouns are. So I'm just kind of making it very general. So you can correct me too.
So maybe I'm going down the wrong path then. They're looking for BDSM relationships online that they'd like to have in person, and they're not finding them.
Is this correct, Ray? I mean, we can say that it is not easy. It's it's just not easy, period. And with okay, so they say, I want FaceTime face most online. So what it sounds like is that you're right. You're looking for a BDSM relationship online, but you're looking to bring that into real life. And yeah, that's that's not easy, because first of all, you have to like the person, and then you have to have compatible kinks. And then like the whole power dynamic thing also can be kind of fluid, or some people are very rigid about it also. So that's a whole other element that you have to contend with when you're trying to find somebody online. I would recommend going to munches. And these are, meetups that happen in person. And I believe that there's, starting to come back now that a lot of places are leveling out with coronavirus. Of course, like most places are probably still requiring masks, and maybe even, happening outdoors. And right now during a pandemic is probably like the most challenging time to actually find somebody. But it's not only just like finding somebody that you want to, it's finding somebody you want to do all these specific things with. Anya, did you have something to say?
I guess I would say that during non-COVID times, when one could attend a munch and meet someone, it's challenging to meet a person who you'd like to spend time with in real life in the first place before integrating all of these fun kinky interests. It's meeting a lot of people. The likelihood that you're going to meet the person who you really would like to explore these things with during one or two outings is slim. It takes a while and takes some tenacity and sticking with it. And I, for one, don't have the tenacity for doing things like online dating or going to munches or meeting up with people from FetLife. And I admire anyone who does. It seems to me like, quite honestly, it's very overwhelming for me to think about this. So I can only imagine how frustrating it must be for you, especially during this time of low face-to-face interpersonal interaction, to struggle with that. And I feel for you. And I do think munches are a fantastic idea, and probably meeting someone in person wearing a mask is the way to go at this point. But I wish I had like a magic wand and could say, this is what we're all missing. This is the easy way to do it. But finding mates in modernity is really hard.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, Ray, that sometimes, you know, in the interim of your search, it would be helpful for you to really get into your own self, like your own pleasure, like where your own pleasure comes from, ritualizing your pleasure, really, you know, having that relationship with yourself and your own sexuality. I think that that's really important right now, especially for, again, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but for women, you know, for us to really, really connect and deeply connect with our own desires, what we want out of everything, how we like to be touched, how we like to be hit, how we like to be squeezed, how we like to, you know, have our hair pulled or be manhandled or what, you know, whatever all of everything is, or how we like to top, like how we like to dominate, how we like to sit on somebody's face or not sit on somebody's face. All of these desires, you know, connecting with them and really getting to know yourself in this intimate way.
Totally.
And a lot of times in this process of really learning yourself and having this intimate relationship with yourself, you become the magnet. You know, you start drawing whatever it is that you want to you, and you don't have to do too much work. You know, you don't have to do too much seeking. You don't have to keep like going through all the swipes and the files. It comes to you. So I'm not saying like that's definitely going to happen, but I think that the work that we do internally and with ourselves right now is actually more important.
That's so wise, Dia. I think that's absolutely it. And maybe it won't draw the person, the magical person or people that you're looking for, but it's valuable work to do. Either way, we only gain from doing that work.
Only gain. And you might just, you know, also discover that maybe you don't need kink from a partner. You know, maybe the idea of engaging with kink is reserved for somebody like who's professional or who's not your partner. You know, like maybe just a playmate, and it's kind of more like you go to a party and you do some pickup play, and that's enough for you. You know, you don't necessarily need it from like your life partner or your boyfriend or whatever. So that's something that's, you know, a possibility as well. Okay, let's take this question here. I'm Tim Bus. Do you think COVID will ever be gone enough that real life meetings can occur again?
Hopefully, fingers crossed. I do. I think real life meetings are already happening. People have different levels of what am I trying to say? People feel comfortable with different things. People have different approaches to risk awareness and are making and hopefully informed decisions about what works for them. And I think some real life meetings, possibly masked meetings, are already happening. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something that's interesting to you, or maybe it isn't. But yeah, I don't think COVID is going to last forever. And no. I don't know how long it'll last. Hopefully not 5 years longer, but maybe. What do you think, Dia?
Well, I'm already starting to take sessions with select good boys and girls who have been, successfully quarantining themselves and practicing safe health measures. So the answer to thinking COVID will be gone enough, I don't know about COVID being gone enough, but I am having real life meetings already. So, COVID is something that we can't always predict because of its elusiveness, but if we're all as careful as we possibly can be, and there aren't like a bunch of, unmasked rallies going on where people who don't believe in COVID are out there spreading it. If we're all, being good boys and good girls and good in-betweens and good NBs, then yeah, COVID will be gone enough.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon. Okay, so while we're waiting for more questions to roll in, if there's more questions, please go ahead and tap them in. Anya, do you have any upcoming projects or announcements that you'd like to make?
Do I have any upcoming projects or announcements? No, not at all. That's not true. I'm putting together a Patreon, and you can expect to hear more from me on that in the coming 6 weeks. That hopefully attempts to express some of the coalescing theories and ideas that we've talked about, some of my spiritual practices and folk magic inclinations and BDSM, but probably on the tamer side because it's Patreon and not OnlyFans. BDSM inclinations that I'm combining into a project that I haven't quite figured out yet, but do intend to figure out within the next 6 weeks, which I know is a bit anticlimactic, but stay tuned. That's something that I'm working on. Other than that, reach out to your dominatrices. They may be offering sessions.
Yes. There's quite a few that I know of offering sessions in the New York area. I'm not really sure about on the West Coast yet. So yeah, it just depends on who you reach out to. So speaking of Patreon, I'm really glad to know that you're going to be starting one, and I look forward to hearing more about it and promoting it. But here is ours. Our La Maison de Rouge Patreon offers 4 tiers of membership, and most of the tiers offer monthly subtasks as well as video chats with Lucy Sweetkill and myself. And so these are times when you can ask questions or talk about whatever you want. They usually end up being pretty helpful for pretty much anybody that, that joins. Let's see. We've got one more question. Would you consider creating an approved list for the US? Approved in what way?
Approved list of what?
Of what? Yeah. So that is a good, that's a nice thought. And approved mistresses. No, that's not the kind of work that I want to do. Because it can change, and I'm not really up to reaching out to every mistress in the US and asking if they are providing sessions and then updating that whenever, you know, like it would be easier if you wanted to see somebody and you reached out to them. So just because, you know, even if I created some sort of extensive list like this with all so much labor, it doesn't mean that they would see you anyway. So there you go. All right. So if anybody has any more questions, Ray, thank you for asking. Then we will wrap it up. Let me see. Just making sure that there aren't any questions that I missed. Okay. There's a question mark, but I don't think that's a question. All right. All right.
Well, not question questions.
Sometimes, you know, it's like some kind of, you know, statement with a question at the end that's not quite a question. All right. So thank you to our audiences for being so polite and asking thoughtful questions and so engaging. And most of all, thank you, Anya Avalon, for your lovely presence and your thoughtful answers as well. And make sure you tune in next week, same time, same channel. We will have Lucy, or it might be me again. But, you know, we're always going to be on every Monday with somebody interesting. So make sure you come back. And if you want to support the work that we do, patreon.com/La Maison de Rouge is how you support us. So I'm going to end this broadcast, and Anya, I will see you in a second.
Sounds good, Dia. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.